Hello, how you doing?
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Gabriel, Megan. Okay.
Hello.
Very
Good
nice to
afternoon.
meet
Nice
you.
to see you. Same here. Just excuse me. I need to switch to my other Zoom. I think this has a problem. That's why my video is not showing. So I'll just switch to my other device.
Okay, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'll do that in a moment. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a good day and we're excited to be here. My name is Juliana Imam and I'll be anchoring while we wait for Rebecca to join us. So we'll quickly just move to the presentations for today, considering that some of our mentees have to leave early. So our topic for today is bias in artificial intelligence and machine learning and the impacts and its impacts. So we'll be going straight to the presentations. Please can we hear from group 1? You have 8 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, before starting the presentations, I wanted to, even before, congratulate every one of you because this is not an easy topic. I know that. So congratulations for all of you for all your efforts.
Thank you very much, Doha. So let's hear from group 1. And I want to acknowledge the presence of every mentor that is here. Hi, Gabriel. Hi, Mr. Matt. And I'm sure our 4th mentor will be joining us shortly. So hi, Matt, it's good to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good to see you.
Hi, Matt. Very nice to see you.
Hi everyone. I hope I am audible enough. All right. My name is Megan Kathire. I'll be presenting on behalf of Group 1 today. And the topic of discussion, as earlier hinted, was bias in AI and its implications. So we'll define what is AI bias, identify its causes and types, its implications, and how we address bias. So AI bias is, or can be defined as a phenomenon that occurs when an AI algorithm produces results that are systemically prejudiced due to erroneous assumptions in the machine learning process. Hence, in most of instances, AI bias results to decision-making that are systematically unfair to certain groups of people. It can also be defined as an anomaly in the output of machine learning algorithms due to the prejudiced assumptions made during the algorithm development process or prejudices in the training data. AI bias is introduced often through the programming choices, data selection, and performance metrics. What are some of the types of AI bias? AI bias in reporting. This is a type of AI bias that arises when the frequency of events in the training data set does not accurately reflect reality. Another type of AI bias is close selection bias, whereby this is a bias which occurs if training data is either unrepresentative or is selected without proper randomization. We also have group attribution bias, which takes place when data teams extrapolate what is true of individuals to entire groups the individual is or is not part of. And lastly, implicit bias. This is a type of bias of, when AI assumptions are made based on personal experiences that does not necessarily apply more generally. For instance, you would have scientists picking up on cultural cues about women being housekeepers, and they will struggle to connect women to influential roles in businesses despite their conscious belief in gender equality. As earlier hinted, that bias is introduced through performance metrics or data selection. Other causes of bias have also been distinguished as follows. We have bias in modeling, we have bias in training, and bias in usage. So for bias in training, an algorithm learns to make decisions or predictions based on data sets that often contain past decisions. If a data set used for training purposes reflects existing prejudices, algorithms will very likely learn to make the same biased decisions. A very quick demonstration of this, if you Google search professional hair versus unprofessional hair, you'll find that professional hair is deemed to be hair that resembles that of white men, or women that is straight, and unprofessional hair would be deemed, or rather is characterized as African hair, which is kinky. Bias in usage. These are algorithms result in bias. Algorithms can result in bias when they're used in a situation for which they were not intended. An algorithm utilized to predict a particular outcome in a given population can lead to inaccurate results when applied to a different population. This is a form of transfer context bias. Moving on to sorry, my screen seems to have stalled. Just give me a minute.
Okay. Hi, Megan. Maybe you can just continue the presentation and stop sharing the slides so someone else can help you share in your group.
All right. So as that gets sorted, I'll this is of AI bias. In the first instance, we have recruitment technologies. Most people or organizations using recruitment technologies use them with the objective to cut administration cost and to reduce the risk of bad hire. AI programs, as we know, are therefore increasingly used to review job application resumes in order to recruit top talent or in school admissions. However, these algorithms have been known to display AI bias, resulting in the exclusion of qualified candidates based solely on their race or gender. A very common example is Amazon's AI recruitment tool in 2018, which was discovered that the program favored male applicants over female applicants. It downgrading applications that included the white women, such as women applicants, therefore, who went to women's colleges or participated in a female group or organization were not opted for, as opposed to male applicants. Also in the 1988, the United Kingdom Commission for Racial Equality found that a British medical school was guilty of discrimination because of AI bias in their computer programming. It was found that their computer program unfairly discriminated against women and people with non-European sounding names when selecting candidates for the interview process. Another instance of AI bias technology includes facial recognition technologies, whereby, for instance, darker skin tones are not easily identified or are not as easily identified in comparisons to lighter skin tones. In this case, you could watch the documentary which is called Coded Bias, featuring Dr. Joy Bolyawemi. Another instance of AI bias technology include natural language processing models to detect undesirable language online in terms of erroneously identifying censored comments mentioning disabilities or failure to acknowledge other languages aside from English. Lastly, I would mention recidivism algorithms. The common most technology in this case is the racist criminological software, which is used in the United States to measure the recidivism risk of criminals, and it's proven that it risks, or rather it creates Black defendants with a higher likelihood of being repeat offenders than white defendants. In terms of bias implications, we know that use of such technologies can reproduce cultural bias. They can entrench systemic inequalities such as gender inequality and racism, false arrest and false imprisonment due to false facial recognition matches. We could also have predatory lending technologies and poor content moderation, as was the case. Currently is the case with the Tigrayan conflict, because Facebook failed to moderate content that was being reported as increasing conflict in the region. And then lastly, how to address AI bias? One, ensuring we have data diversity, bringing multiple sources to the training data, ensuring there's a better data labeling and effective sampling, maintaining diversity in the teams of developers working on the algorithm, and lastly, monitoring and assessing models over time to identify inherent bias through various programs such as the Twitter algorithm bias back bounty. That will be all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Megan, for that presentation. Beautiful presentation. Okay, so let's hear from group 2 before we hear from our mentors. Group 2, please quickly unmute yourself and share your screen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Very nice to meet you.
Yeah. So I'm Maidele Olusegun. I'll be presenting on behalf of Group 2. So I'll share the screen now. I'm coming. Okay, I'm having problem trying to share the screen. Okay, can we all see the screen now?
Yes, we can see it. Please go ahead.
Okay, so our topic could be bias in AI and machine learning and its implications. So let me just start. What is bias in AI? Okay, AI bias can be a phenomenon in which an AI algorithm delivers outputs that are systematically based as a result of incorrect assumptions made throughout the machine learning process. An example of AI bias is number one, gender prejudice, age, racial discrimination, algorithm prejudice, underestimation, and negative legacy. Are you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
Okay, then let's go to the causes of bias in AI and machine. Now, it says that the hypothesis formed when constructing AI models, often known as algorithm bias, could be one source of this problem. According to psychologists, there are approximately 180 cognitive biases, some of which may find their way into hypotheses and influence the design of AI algorithm. Assuming that the model will be less prejudiced if it is not given access to protected classes, such as race, is an example of algorithmic AI bias. In practice, removing the protected classes from the analysis does not mean that AI systems are free of racial bias. Using comparable non-protected elements such as geographic data, the model could nevertheless produce biased findings, a process called as proxy discrimination. Now, that's one cause. Another cause of AI bias in machine is replication. That's replication. Replication of the poor quality of data used to train AI models. Human decisions may be reflected in the training data, as well as societal or historical injustice. In a predominantly male business, for example, if an employer utilizes an AI-based recruiting tool educated on previous employee data, AI is likely to duplicate gender bias. Natural language processing algorithms are no exception. AI is likely to demonstrate language bias and reinforce existing preconceptions when learning from real-world data, such as news, headlines, or social media posts. This was happening when this Google Translate app, this Google Translator app that they used to translate, they used to translate from languages having gender-neutral pronouns, and it was shown to be biased against women. Now, another cause for AI bias is how training data is obtained and processed. Excluding valuable inputs, inaccurate labeling, and under and oversampling are all faults data analysts can make. Like now, under sampling, you might maybe just, if you are using undersampling, you might ignore the minority classes and disregard them. While oversampling, certain groups or factors may be overrepresented in training data sets. Like in Nigeria, a place like maybe a notorious place in Lagos, like Ajegunle, that's notorious for crimes and other social vices might be overrepresented in the AI algorithm. This would be a cause of bias. Then the next cause of bias is feedback of real-world consumers interacting with AI models. People may unwittingly reinforce bias in AI models that have already been deployed. For example, a credit card firm may sell its products using an AI system that reflects social bias in a modest way, that they will be targeting illiterates or people that are not really educated with higher interest rate offers. Now let's move on to the implications of bias in AI and machine learning. Number one, we have ethical issues. Law enforcement agencies and some private entities already use facial recognition technology for identification. If there is a mistake or there's bias in the AI, it can lead to false imprisonment, injustice. Now let's go to reputational damage. A mistake made by AI or in the bias can cause reputational damage of the company. For example, in 2018, when Amazon infused hiring practices, it gathered some negative press when it was noticed that their computer models, which has been trained predominantly on resumes submitted by men, were biased against female applicants. In 2018, Amazon had their hiring practices. They based it on male resumes, so it was biased against the female gender. That's good. Another one is lost opportunities, lack of trust from users. As human beings, there's this saying that first impressions matters and it lasts. So if employees have seen that AI deliver poor results, there's some people that no matter what the company did to improve the AI features, they will still not trust it again. They've lost the trust forever. Then we also have regulatory and compliance problems. We move on to prevention of bias in AI and machine learning. Number one, examine the situation. first of all, we have to first examine the situation. We have to, the AI has to look back at previous models, learn from the mistakes, and think of how to improve the situation later in the future. Then we have design AI models with inclusion in mind. Before developing AI algorithm, it is a good idea to consult with humanists and social scientists to verify that the models you construct don't inherit the biases that people have. When you want to make AI, you can consult with experts in human psychology, experts in human science, and ask for advice. Then the next one is use complete and representative data to train your AI models, as it necessitates the development of techniques and recommendations for collecting, sampling, and preprocessing training data. You could enlist the help of both your internal teams and your external teams for help. Then we have target testing. Target testing, what does it entail? It entails examining the AI's performance across different subgroups while testing your models to find issues that are concealed by aggregate data. You can also do a series of stress tests to see how far the AI model can work and see how it can relate in different situations or circumstances. And the next one is honest human choices. How does this work? AI can assist in revealing flaws in human decision making. So if AI models trained on current human decision or behavior review bias, be prepared to think about how human-driven systems may be improved in the future. We go on to improve AI's ability to be explained. Now, in this another way of preventing bias in AI and machine learning is improving the AI's ability to be explained. Now, if you can explain the various reasons for the particular AI action that was taken, then bias can be reduced. Now we go on to the bias reduction tools. There are a lot of bias reduction tools that have been made today. Number one, we have AI Fairness 360. Now on GitHub, IBM launched an open source framework for detecting and mitigating biases in supervised learning algorithms. They had 34 contributors as of September 2020. The package is called AI Fairness 360, and it allows AI programmers to use a comprehensive collection of metrics to test biases in models and data sets. Another bias reduction tool is IBM Watson Open Scale. Now, this scale is used to detect bias and mitigation in AI choices and decisions. Then lastly, we have Google's What If tool. You can use this What If tool to test performance in hypothetical scenarios, hypothetical situations, and you can see, it can allow the AI to show model behaviors across many models and subsets of input data, and as well as for several ML fairness measures. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ayodele. Thank you, Group 1 and Group 2. My name is Eya Rebecca, and I'll be taking over from Mrs. Juliana in anchoring this session. Thank you very much. Please, I'd like to call on our mentors to give the mentees feedback on their presentation, the overall presentation, the issues raised and answered. Would begin with Mrs. Idoya. Start from you, please. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So
Yes.
please, your comments.
Yes, more or less it's Idoya, but for me it's okay. Idoya is okay. Like many people call me like that, so it's okay. First of all, I wanted to congratulate the group of Megan and the group of Ayodele for me, it's like a pleasure to know how these students have been able to talk about these things very clearly. And really, for me, it has been like I was like so surprised of. I mean, you are great professionals. You have been great professionals researching about bias of AI. And for me, first of all, congratulate to each one of you. That is the first thing that I wanted to tell you, because I really have seen how like both of you have been like touching the main elements that you have to talk nowadays about bias in AI. It is a real problem in our world because nowadays, as you know, like many companies and many organizations uses already this technology, these AI systems, and we have seen like many cases of discrimination for really most of this discrimination has been done like unconsciously. There has been like a lot of unconsciousness about the use of about the use of this on the use of this technology. I mean, some years ago, we really didn't know that we had to be so care about the data that we were going to be using, so care about the model that we were going to be using in order to do the different products or the uses of AI in our whatever we were going to be using the AI for. And nowadays, what I see is that we are already more conscious about the need of approaching this use of AI also in an ethical way, taking much care about this data and taking much care about so many things. There are one thing that I really like about what Ayodele was saying, that he said that very much truth about how the need of the approach to this topic on the philosophical point of view, on the psychologist point of view, also from the humanist point of view. And it's very important to be conscious about this. This is not about just asking technicians for this, but it is like a very transversal thing. We need people from other fields, so we have like the correct approach to this technology. There is something else important nowadays. Just for them to tell them some advice about this. Nowadays, it is a fact that we are more conscious. Like many companies are more conscious about about this need of being ethical in the use of AI. There is more conscious, at least in the European Union, about one very important factor, which is we never ever have to leave the AI systems, the high-risk AI systems, to work by themselves. That means that it is very important not to let these AI systems, if we are talking about high-risk algorithms, to be final in their conclusions, in their decisions. The final one that has really to take the decisions out of the whole process of the AI system is the human, the person. That is very important. That is maybe that is another thing that we have to take into account in order to leave aside the possible bias that this data set could have. Do not we ever have to take these processes in which we use AI systems in the high-risk situation of just the use of that technology and the technologies and the decision on the technologies go on, and that's it. But please, I tell you this to all the students, please, in every presentation, in every study that you do about this, just put also the human part, and just talk about that as a tool for the human, and also the human. The ethics has to be the ethics of the human and not the ethics of the machine. The bias is still the bias of the human and not the bias of the machine, because we, as Ayodele was saying, we already have some tools that help us in the, to take aside all these variables that could, the gender, the race variables and that could give us like a clear data set without bias. But still, please, in every one of your researches, just keep including the part of that in which do not leave aside do not leave the AI algorithms to work by itself, but always think about the putting the human in the center and talk about. We really have to keep talking about the bias in humans, not that much about the bias in machines. That is the real problem. Thank you so much, and congratulations to both of you.
Thank you very much, Joya. So more emphasis on human bias as they affect artificial intelligence. Thank you very much. So I would like to call on David Timos. Please give us your comments on both presentations, Group 1 and Group 2.
Hi, Rebecca. I unfortunately connected a bit late to the first presentation, so I was not able to follow it thoroughly. But if I refer back to your email, maybe I can make some comments based on the PowerPoint I've seen before the session.
Yes.
And I think going back to also to the key questions I think we're asking now, and let me just try to exit the full screen. The key questions we're asking now, which is, bias in AI, and I think most of the questions you shared with me before these sessions are around the same topic. How can we make use and leverage AI in a way that is more human-centered, which is a challenge for all AI-driven companies. And I used to work for one, for Google for over 4 years, and I know not just at Google, but in many other tech companies, there's a lot of emphasis on trying to bring more voices and more representativity in developing AI, meaning that, if you look even now, unfortunately, in some companies, but less and less in the big tech ones, AI was developed primarily by white men coming from primarily, a Caucasian, European, or North American background. However, this is changing now, and there's more and more people in Africa and Asia who are having the chance to be, at the forefront of developing AI. And I think, to be honest, and this is not just my personal belief, but this is something which I've learned at Google, that's the sort of a short-term solution to making AI more inclusive, is to involve in its development people of diverse backgrounds, not just to have men, but to have also women, not just to have people of one race, but people of multiple races, which will indeed not guarantee 100% that the AI will not be biased, but it will eliminate some of the issues we've seen with AI in the past. That AI being trained just with faces of white people, it was hard for the same AI, given the data it was fed, to identify people of other colors. So I think if you have engineers of multiple backgrounds, you would be able to, at least in the short term, circumvent and help overcome some of the biases which are inherent with any AI eventually. And the question remains, I'm here to potentially also pose questions, not just to answer them or to give my feedback. It's a question which I think it's hard to answer for anybody these days, is, okay, at this stage, the solution I provided is potentially one that could be implemented, and to, have more engineers of mixed backgrounds and genders and races in, developing AI. But when we will reach the point of artificial general intelligence, in which the AI will program itself, I think that's the tricky and interesting question at the same time to ask, how will we make sure that an AI that is programming itself is not biased, when obviously the initial bias that the initial programmers who developed that AI put onto the AI, or sort of transferred to the AI, in a few generations or a few iterations of that AI programming other similar programs or robots, because obviously AI is also behind many of the robotical innovations happening recently. How can we make sure that there's no bias there? Or how can we make sure that the AI, and I think there was a question regarding values, the AI that programs itself keeps some of the, let's say, human-centered values that the initial programmers managed to transmit. So there's plenty of questions, but maybe to not take too much of the time, for at least not this first group, my suggestion is that yes, there is bias, but there are ways which already are proven to work to at least, if not overcoming it fully, to at least diminishing it by having a more diverse group of engineers working on the latest AI development. So this is down to the, I guess, the tech companies to hire more diversely, which at least from their public affairs statements they are, and also of course at the more, let's say, public sector level for governments and especially ministries of education and employment to make sure that there are grants, there are programs that encourage, again, people who are maybe coming from a less traditional background to join STEM, STEM education, STEM careers that are to do with technology, which again is shaping not just the tech industry, but all other sectors. And I will stop here, or I'm not sure if there was a time limit for each of the interventions, but if there's any questions to what I just said, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions will come subsequently, and I'm sure the mentees would be putting together questions from your comments. So please, Martavi, can you give us your comments on the presentations of Group 1 and Group 2 before we move over to the last mentor?
Yeah,
thank you.
With pleasure. So I thought both presentations were excellent. I thought they were both clearly well researched. And between the two of them, it was very comprehensive. And I was very interested to see that the solutions suggested were different. And between them, I really feel that they covered all of the important ideas. I thought everyone gave clear definitions of bias. The structure, I think, was defined by your questions, but was very clear. And I thought everyone gave good examples. So when it came to Megan's presentations, of things that stood out to me as particularly interesting were the problems of reproducing cultural bias, the bias from the inappropriate use of a system, which I think is an important consideration. And then some of the most important risks, the weakening of due process. I mean, I would say that because I'm a lawyer, but I think it's incredibly important to society. And poor content moderation, which again, I think has a massive impact on society. So I think those are very significant examples. And when it came to solutions, I love the reference to bug bounties, getting people to look at your algorithm and to give them rewards for spotting problems. And then Ayodele's presentation again, fantastic, really good examples. And there I particularly like the reference to cognitive bias within teams, the importance of keeping public trust, because that's why we are, that's why it's a win-win. If companies can avoid bias, keep trust, that people use their services, everyone wins. And I think trust is very important. I like the reference to regulatory issues, because that's obviously something that's being developed around the world as we speak. And also the importance of explainability of an AI, so one can understand how it made its decisions to try to figure out the ways in which it is biased. So those were all excellent. I also liked the practical tips on some tools which existed. I didn't know any of those, so that I learned something there. So thank you very much. My overall comments is really, I felt you covered everything. And the context I would give is, I think that there is no easy fix to bias at all, because there's a lack of technical solutions to identify bias and to fix bias. It is actually a struggle for many companies to get truly representative data to make sure no groups of the public or no countries are underrepresented. And as the second presentation made clear, lack of explainability makes it hard to understand when it comes to machine learning why a decision is being made. And I totally agree with David that having diverse developers of AI is probably the best first step to try to get people to notice and recognize bias, but it's hard work. And I totally agree that training and recruitment is a genuine challenge. And then Adoya's comments about having a human in the loop, that's very much the European perspective. It's also got social benefits as well, to make sure that we use AI to augment humans rather than to replace them. But it does lack scalability if humans genuinely have to stay in the loop on every use of AI. And I want to return to the second presentation about cognitive bias, because it's humans in the loop have to remain, one, they have to not be biased themselves, which isn't realistic. And two, they have to avoid trusting the machine too much. And that's, again, possibly against human nature. So human in the loop is a complex thing to implement, even though it may be the right thing to do. And I think my takeaway, my one message takeaway, is that at the moment, the best thing we can do is to make sure we've asked the question, and this returns to Megan's point, is the usage actually appropriate of the system at all? Because if we can't mitigate or eliminate the bias, it may just be that we shouldn't be using AI in that application. So thank you very much. Very good.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for your contribution. So Mr. Gabriel, please, we'd like to take your comments now. And of course, we'll start the questions with you. So when you're done with your contribution, please stay with us. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just quickly start by saying that today I am impressively overwhelmed, not just by the persons we have on the other mentors today, but on the presentations I've seen things that, like Matt has said, there are things I never had an idea of, and there are questions I hope I'll get answers also from the other mentors, because there are questions that are yet still to be answered. So quickly to the presentation, both teams came up with lots and lots of facts and impressive details, many of which I just learned myself, man. And I think both covered most of the discussions in the AI area. And the comments from the other mentors have covered most of the things I would have liked to say, but then I'd still just point out a few things as a follow-up to especially what Matt, Professor Salas has said, and then what David had said earlier. In Megan's discussion, Megan talked about diversity as one of the solutions to the problem of AI bias, talked about diversity in the teams. And yeah, it's always been my strongest point that in whatever format we want to solve the problem of the problems generally that come with the use of artificial intelligence, we need to look at the human element first. And it's very important. No matter how much we try to divert our attention to faulty machinery and all that, there's always going to be the human element at the beginning point, where the use, the transfer of intelligence, I choose to call it the transfer of intelligence. So if we don't fix bias in the human element, then it's going to be very difficult, almost impossible, to fix bias in AI systems. And then I share with David the concern of fixing biases in when we finally get to have artificial general intelligence. I don't really know how far we are from that. I hope David is going to. I'm really glad that someone that has worked with Google, because there's been, from personal research, there's been lots of very very confusing details we've got when it comes to Google technologies and faulty AI, especially with facial recognition and all that. So maybe he is going to throw some light on that. And then Ayodele, the second presentation, also talked about, did a lot of job reflecting the need to have the human element in the systems. All sorts of biases can easily be fixed if we get to fix the human elements in that. Okay, and so yes, both teams came out really with really impressive ideas. And like I said earlier, I'm still really overwhelmed, but I'll try to take some of the questions. I don't know whether I should take the questions one after the other, or sorry, Sophia, do I take the questions from number one after the other?
If she's not with us, maybe I'll just read out the first question, and then the mentors can go ahead to answer them. So the first question that we have here, please hold on.
Okay, can I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the
You can
first
read out the first
question
question.
is in the section of highlighting bias, you make reference to human bias in a manner to suggest that human bias is the core causation of AI bias. Kindly highlight the extent that human bias feeds other form of bias you have identified, such as selection bias. And further to the same, give clear explanations on the identified categories of bias and their causation. So please highlight the extent that human bias feeds other forms of bias, such as selection bias, and give clear explanations on the identified categories of bias and their causation. Thank you very much. So I think we're starting with Mr. Gabriel, right? Mr. Gabriel, please. We're starting with you and answering the questions.
Yeah, I can see I can see Matavi smiling. I'm sure he has a whole lot of answers. And like I said today, I think I'm going to learn a lot more.
Okay.
I would have preferred if the answers came the other way around, but then I'll just make a few comments on that question and then wait and hope to get to hear from Matt and David. I really wish Professor Salazar was here because I've attempted to read some of our books, but they are mostly in Spanish. I wanted to tell her that I need an English version of those books on algorithms and all that. Okay, so this is a very wide question. I'll just pick a particular area that talks about forms of selection bias. And one of the things that strike me very quickly is the use of ATS systems, applicant tracking systems. From research, I'm not sure there are many companies, even in Europe, that are not using that, especially for applicant selection processes. And I've done, even recently in the last couple of weeks, I decided to carry out some personal research on this, and I realized that it's very glaring, and whatever happens at the back end, the applicant doesn't even get to see it. So this is one of the most widely found areas of bias in selection. There are so many others, but this is the one that hits very quickly. There are also other areas, for instance, in face recognition, image recognition, and like was mentioned in one of the presentations, with racial recognition and all that. I remember there's a study that indicated that as at 2020, I think 2 years ago, during the coronavirus pandemic, an image of hands holding the thermometer gun were fed into the Google algorithmic systems, and it quickly identified a white hand on the gun and misidentified a black hand on the gun. When there's a black hand holding the gun, it indicated that this was a gun. Of course, the usual gun we know, but when it was a white hand, it showed that it was an electronic device. This probably wasn't sure of what it was. So this is one of the other areas where you have, there are so many of these systems, if that answers that first part of the question. And I talked about, I had a post on LinkedIn where, because I do some Python programming too. And one of my posts, I wrote a program, a very short, very basic level example of a program that carries out some of these biases. So you could just quickly take a look at it. It's a very short video, a very short program that shows how biases are propagated behind the systems that you find. And causation, most of them have been discussed in the presentations. What causes bias? This bias is, for me, the first point of causation of biases come from the human element. Who is designing these systems? What kind of biases do these human beings come with? Professor Salazar mentioned that we should look at human biases more than we're looking at biases in the technology. If we can fix these human biases, those other things would go away. And this has been a major concern, especially in Africa. Like she mentioned, in Europe, there are so many of these biases. There are regulations to check to an extent, though I'm not sure it does a very good job of checking. But in Africa, it's difficult to find regulations that check these things or that even attempt to fix, because of course it can't completely fix. So it's difficult to find regulations that check this. We don't have a structure of a system that checks this, and these are the other problems that would come. So as the causation could be first, bias in the human elements behind the systems, and secondly, societal bias. There's a bias in the society, like we have in Africa. There are certain biases against women, and this just gets fed into the system by the developers or whoever is behind the system. So this is my opinion, and I hope to hear a lot more from Matt and David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gabriel. So over to Matt, please, your contribution to the same question.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I don't want to just disappoint Gabriel, but I'm primarily a lawyer. I'm not a technical person, so I don't have huge insight into.
I'm a lawyer too, Matt.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, I can't give particular detail on the technical side, but what I do understand is that yes, human bias is incredibly significant to the result of bias in machine learning. And that is the data may reflect, you may have genuine representative data of what's really happened in the real world, but it reflects human bias because the world is biased and all you're doing is crystallizing in a machine what happens in the real world. The second one, which I think has been addressed a lot, is that the developers of AI systems, again, I think often unintentionally, aren't sufficiently diverse and make unconscious choices and assumptions, which end up with a biased system. There's also an economic issue, which is that a lot of these systems are being developed for a particular market first off. So while we hear very pronounced and upsetting examples where, let's say, an African accent isn't recognized as readily, it happens to a much smaller degree if you have an English accent as opposed to a US accent, because a lot of these products were first developed by US companies for the US market, and it's partly economics about how they've developed it. But beyond human bias, there are genuine challenges to avoiding bias, and I mentioned them briefly already, but it is access to sufficient bodies of data. And it may be that some countries, either because of their privacy laws or because of the amount of connected devices or the sorts of services which are already on offer, there are differences around the world about how much available training data there is for their populations. And that's a genuine issue, and access to data is always a challenge in developing these systems. I think the other fundamental issue, which isn't about human bias, is about machine learning as the technique of choice at the moment. And it is machine learning which has developed so much potential in the last 10 years, but it's a system in which the machine programs itself by finding patterns. But it may do so in a way which means that it's hard to understand how it's made its decisions. And that's already been covered in the second presentation, that without explainability, it's hard to address bias. But I want to emphasize that even if you know your machine learning algorithm is biased, it's actually hard to adjust it. You can give it more good examples from data, but as you train it, that affects its overall performance in ways that you can't really control. So throwing more data at it may help or may not, but it's a delicate and nuanced thing. So you can't necessarily fix the things you've identified as a problem. And so I do think at the moment, until we have better data and we have better techniques, the issue returns to the issue of trust and making sure that what you do with your AI is in fact appropriate, and that people, to the extent they can, understand how the system is biased and try to use it or not use it appropriately.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. So David, please, your contribution to the question. the extent to which human bias feeds other forms of bias, and explanations on the identified categories of bias and their causation. Thank you very much.
Rebecca, sorry, I know there's a few questions from Juliana that she copy pasted here. And I know you just mentioned this one now, but should I answer the same question, or is it, I can choose from the list of questions here? Because I think the questions you just posed, I think my predecessors have already answered it, and I also sort of give my thoughts to it and my opinion in my previous answer. So I'm just wondering if we can choose from these questions, or what's your suggestion?
Okay, each mentor is supposed to contribute to your question. So if you have an additional opinion or additional point that has not been mentioned on this particular question, you can share with us, or otherwise you can move to another question if you feel it has been answered sufficiently.
I think it could be more valuable if I go to a follow-up or to a next question, if you're okay with that. And I'm happy to go with whatever, if it's the next one in line, or with...
Okay, so we'll move to the third question. Can the problem of gender or race bias in AI ever be solved? If yes, how long would it take, seeing that the world is an ever-evolving and heterogeneous space? So gender or race bias in AI.
Thank you. Thank you for the flexibility. And I think this, as many of the other questions, are great questions, but obviously questions that we can just give personal opinions now. Nobody has an answer. By the way things look now, I think the problem cannot be fully solved, but it can be sort of solved to at least the degree of 90%, at least in the immediate term, if all the things that either myself or my predecessors, the other speakers, the other mentors have mentioned, be it working to have a more inclusive and diverse pool of developers that work on these technologies, working with governments, obviously, and I am based in Brussels, so I know how important it is to have regulators involved in the debate, and at the end of the day, also consumers, to make sure that, you know, the developer, the tech company, the public sector, the governments, and also its end users, the consumers, are all satisfied with the solutions provided. So I think if all these three actors play their part and do the best for, as I said, having a more diverse group of developers working for, you know, for the development of these technologies, I think the problem can be definitely not fully solved, but leveraged to a degree and sort of, you know, diminished in terms of negative outcomes to, you know, up until 90% success rate. So, and I'm not sure how long would it take, but I know that at least in terms of the regulation component, I think some of these AI debates are just starting, or have started to happen over the past 2 to 5 years, which is exactly the time I've been based in Brussels, pretty much. So I know it's very early, a very early debate from a policy standpoint. So taking this into account, I would say at least another 5 to 10 years before we can have, at least from a policy perspective, clear regulations in place that are also functional. And to make a small maybe joke or an insider joke, given that I am in Brussels, when these regulations will be put into place, let's hope and pray that they will not be like GDPR, like General Data Protection Regulation, which unfortunately, as many here would agree, haven't actually hurt the big tech companies, but they actually hurt the small SMEs, startups, because again, the way the regulators put it together with the best intentions was not eventually ideal in the implementation. So that being said, I hope the AI policies that will be put forth in the next 5 to 10 years will have in mind the whole of the economy, not just the big tech giants who will probably have you know, solutions to either circumnavigate some of the rules or to be compliant because they have the resources to do so. I just want to make this small addendum because I know we've brought up the topic of policy, and one of my predecessor mentor here mentioned it as well. I think it's one of the most exciting parts of the debate, which unfortunately it's also the slowest one to come to a solution, I think. So that would be my answer. I know it's a bit vague, but also the question, I think it's a really aspirational. I mean, there's There's no clear sight on when we will have a solution, but I do hope there's a solution in the makings.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
You,
So from a policy standpoint, you assume 5 to 10 years. Mr. Gabriel, please, you have further contribution to the same question that Dave just answered. Can the problem of gender or race bias in AI ever be solved, and an estimated time frame in your opinion?
Okay, yeah, like David has said, it's just going to be from personal opinion and from personal observations. So a very quick answer to the question, no. It's completely impossible to solve. It's like asking whether the problems of crime in a society can be completely waved away. It's impossible. We can check it. We can try to reduce it with policies, laws, but it's completely, especially take a look at communities in Africa, for instance. I mean, it might look, might be a lot less complicated in Europe. David has mentioned the presence of the GDPR, and truly it's just affecting the small boys in quotes. The big guys just go ahead and do their thing, and they find a way around the glass. It doesn't break. They don't break it, they just go around it. So it's a lot easier in Europe, but in Africa, with all the diversity and the things we have, in Nigeria, especially in Nigeria, where we have so many ethnic groups, so many languages, the first bias and then cultural biases, hey, he doesn't come from here. And I mean, this bias is reflecting everything, even in the constitution of Nigeria. There's the federal character principle, you know, the struggle to try to bring everyone together. Our daily lives, there's a reflection of this bias. So it's going to be a lot more. And considering also the fact that we import a lot of technology, we are not really sure. We don't have systems, active systems that check what technology comes in and check all the algorithms and of some of the softwares that we receive into the, so we can just receive whatever gets here. We buy these things we buy technology from China, from some members of the EU, from the UK, and all that. So it's going to be difficult to check this. So back to the question, it's a big no. It's not possible. We can try to predict how much time it will take for some countries or some parts of the world to make policies like David has done. I'm not sure Africa has, in the next 10 years, I'm not sure we're going to have effective policies as effective as the GDPR. So it's going to take quite a longer time for Africa and some other parts of the world like Asia. I think Europe might have a shorter time towards regulating, but it's not, I don't think it's possible to completely just end the bias with AI. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much. So similar opinion. Matt, I don't know if you have any contribution to it. What's your opinion?
I don't think David and Gabriel did give the same answer at all. But I actually agree with both of them, you'll be surprised to know, because I think it is undoubtedly the case that we cannot fix society, and there's no end point of that. And one of the reasons you can't fix society is that social norms always change anyway. So it's an ever developing picture of what we feel is right and wrong. But the way in which I'll agree with David is that it might be possible to eliminate the additional bias in AI so that AI reflects the current social norms of its day. Whether or not that's helpful, I don't know. I think it probably is, to make sure that AI isn't confounding things further. But I would say, even in a hopeful note, a non-cynical hopeful note, that AI, particularly data analytics generally, I think is actually leading the debate in actually identifying bias in the real world. And it does have a positive role to play in that regard.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the mentors for your contribution. So moving on to the next question. We'll start with you, Matt, since you're still here. Is it possible to teach machines ethics, empathy, or compassion? Is it possible to teach machines? Sure.
So okay. I think this is a technical question and a philosophical question. So on a philosophical level, assuming I can get a machine to replicate the decisions that a human makes when it comes to ethics, empathy, and compassion. Does the machine feel anything? Is it the equivalent of us, even if its behavior is the same? So that's the first question. I don't have an answer to that. That's a philosophical question. It depends on what you think computers are, and indeed what you think our brains are, and whether there's something unique beyond our biology that makes us special and human. In terms of the technical side, theoretically, you can reproduce the behaviors that you expect from people. But I think there are two fundamental issues. One is that there is actually no consensus at all on humans' reactions when it comes to empathy, ethics, and compassion. Even within relatively small populations, people will come up with different decisions. And so we have no universals that we can genuinely train an AI on. And I think far more fundamental, though, is that current machine learning is all about correlation, not causation or understanding. So an AI can be trained that in a certain circumstance, and let's take an ethical example. Let's assume that the training data shows that a self-driving car should run over a cat rather than a person. And the training data, you actually have training data to show that. It can learn that that is the outcome that's desired, but it won't know why. It won't know what we think of humans or what we think of cats or what the ethical basis is. And as a result, as soon as it sees a slightly different scenario, it's looking for correlation. It has no actual understanding. And so I doubt you could robustly teach these laws. And then the final point I'd make, and this is one that's been made by the European Parliament on its white paper, is it looked at Asimov's laws of robotics. And they're an example where in only 3 and then later 4 rules, he tried to lay out a massive guideline. Most of our ethical rules are incredibly high level when they're written out, and none of the nuances there. If you can't teach that at all, and you certainly can't program that. So under current technology, I think it's a no, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much. So before the other 2 mentors give the answers to the question, I would like to add another part to it. So how can we coexist with machines that inherently lack human values? How can we coexist with machines that inherently lack human values? Then is it possible to teach machines ethics, empathy, and compassion? David, please, would like you to take both questions together.
Sure, happy to. Thank you, Rebecca. So to answer the last question, I mean, teach machine ethics, empathy, or compassion, I think this is really difficult to say at this stage in which we're barely managing to teach a machine, a robot to open a door. Especially the mechanics of doing basic things for humans are still very difficult to implement in machines, in robots in particular. Teaching them ethics, empathy, or compassion, I think it's a step that we haven't yet reached. However, there's signs that we can teach AI, so obviously the brains of these machines and robots we're referring to, we can teach them creative skills. We already have AI composers, AI journalists, so we do have a few creative fields that are traditionally reserved for humans that now we have technology software that is able to reproduce quite accurately, jobs and sort of functions that so far humans have. And I mentioned this because initially, if you'd have asked the person if a robot can ever be creative, the answer would have been a clear no. So that's why I'm, as much as I'm tempted to say no, we cannot teach a robot ethics, empathy, or compassion. If you ask me this question, maybe in 5 years, I might have to, bite my tongue and say, no, it's actually possible now. So I would tentatively say it could be possible, but not at this stage. And we're still, I would say, far from it, but it definitely is not impossible, seeing how, or envisioning the sort of changes that the artificial general intelligence could bring to the fore. I think anything can change when the technology will be ready for, let's say, implementation at scale. And to answer the fourth question, how we can coexist with machines that inherently lack human values, we already do it without any issue, I think, meaning that many of the technologies we use now and the machines we use, because we do use robots. I mean, we do have robots that are cleaning our homes, and we have robots in factories, and we coexist with them, and there's no issue whatsoever. So I think as long as the robots will actually not have any, how can I put it? They will not have any sort of self-determination to judge us or to criticize us or to sort of override human decisions, which I think would be quite dangerous. If this is not the case, if they have human values or not, I think it will be, at least initially, less relevant. I think we're still trying to solve much more basic issues. And yeah, in a future in which we'll have a robot in every home, indeed, it would be great to have somebody who's as closely relatable to us as possible and to have the best of our human values, but that's still a far place to be in. I think Elon Musk made an interesting comment in one of his recent interviews for TED.com, in which he said there is obviously a development of a humanoid robot at Tesla, and he made the comment that he sees this potential of using that humanoid robot not just in factories to build Teslas and other cars or materials or machines, but also in people's homes. And he made the comment that he will obviously dream of this future, but at the same time be worried about it unless the humanoid robots have a stop button that cannot be overridden from a distance, that cannot be controlled from a distance, that, either through a command or through literally a button, the owner of that robot can stop whatever wrong that robot is doing, knowingly or unknowingly. So as long as there's a process in place or a system in place to have machines in our homes eventually, but have them fully within our control, I think that coexistence is possible, and initially that will not require, I think, empathy, human values, but just sort of the sort of relationship you have maybe with the pet nowadays. You would have a robot that responds to your commands and needs obviously some basic skills to do so, but yeah, looking for counseling and other sorts of types of support from a robot are not something that I think is, at least in the immediate future, possible. Maybe in, I don't know, 20, 30 years, yes, but not earlier than that, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much, Davy, for your
Thank you, Rebecca.
answer and explanation. So, Mr. Gabriel, please, your contribution to the questions.
Okay, so let me take the first one, whether we can coexist with, humans can coexist with AI technologies and all that. And yeah, just like David has said, yes, we're already there. I'd like to add that as long as we stay in control, there won't be problems. That usually brings the fear of artificial general intelligence. And I mean, this has been the concern for especially developers of autonomous weapon systems. The questions of ethics, which I would go into much later in the discourse, is also there. We need to find a way to ensure that there's always a human element for the purposes of responsibility. Because I mean, our societies are, most of our society, well, not most of our societies, many of our societies have now been completely automated. We've had this conversation about electricity. There are societies that cannot function if you turn off power. Of course, there are societies that would not function properly if you turn off so many forms of technology. Traffic lights, the trains, transportation, health services, all these banking services, most of them now are being automated. So yeah, already I think we're already there. As long as we stay in control, then there shouldn't be problems. But then the fear comes, and that fear leads us to the next question. Is it possible to teach them ethics? Because the way we're going, it's difficult to tell that we are never going to have artificial general intelligence, which would mean that we must have fed it with some ethical information. Whatever it gets to learn subsequently would be dependent on what it originally, the platform it originally got. I use an example. I am Nigerian. I speak a lot of English, But I've been to school, I've learned so many other things, but I wasn't able to speak German when I got to Germany. And that's because for the early years of my training, there was nobody that taught me German. There's no German background, there's nothing. Now I can learn other things on my own, but the fear is I can also decide, like I have done, to learn the German language independently, because there is also the capacity now for me to independently learn a new language. So I think this is also the process. I try to play this out also with in the use of in what we finally may have as artificial general intelligence. I am not certain if we can teach we can teach artificial intelligence ethics, empathy, and compassion. I think these are things that are strictly human. They are strictly, you can only just have them in humans. But what we can do is, which I think human beings are already doing, we try to process these emotions and replicate the results in these machines. So for instance, if a human, like we have in some autonomous weapon systems, if a UAV, a drone that's loaded with weapons, runs autonomously and is supposed to drop a bomb in a particular place, it could be taught not to drop a bomb because there are children there. And like Matt said, it doesn't need to understand why, but the human that processed the feeling, the emotion, the empathy, had fed it with the result of the empathy. Hey, we can't kill children in war zones. They are just children. The machine doesn't get it. It's not taught to have the emotions, but it's taught to act in accordance with the results of the human emotions. So yes, we cannot directly teach a machine. I think we can't teach them ethics. We can't teach them emotions. We can only replicate the results of the emotions we have as humans. And these machines would now be bound to act on the results of these replications. But this would be quite difficult if we get artificial general intelligence, because AGI would mean that the machine can now ask, okay, but this child is also armed. What if I just find a way to disarm the child? And that becomes something secondary from what it was originally fed with. That would mean that the machine now has its own ethical structure, which would be very dangerous, I think. So yes, on a very quick answer to the question, I don't think we can teach them ethics. These are human values, but we can, pass the results of human perception into the artificial intelligence. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gabriel. So he says, so long as we're in charge, then there isn't too much cause for concern. And speaking on David's contribution, he's not giving a definite no to the question. So there's room for possibilities in 10, 20, 30 years. Keep an open mind about it. And thank you very much to all the mentors for your contributions, for the questions answered, feedbacks to the presentations. And thank you to the members of Group 1 and 2 for your presentation. It has been an amazing and enlightening session. So I'll be calling on Mrs. Juliana to give a vote of thanks as we round up today's session. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that moderation. It's so excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'd like to say a very big thank you to all the mentees. Thank you for researching. Thank you for cooperating with one another and for the beautiful presentations. And finally, I would like to thank our mentors. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. The second time you are coming, we are so grateful. Thank you, Gabriel. This is also the second time you're coming. We are so grateful. And thank you so much to David for the sacrifice, and thank you for coming. And lastly, to Idoha for her time with us. Please, I would like us to put our videos on, because I would like us to take a picture. All the mentees, please put your videos on, take a picture, post about it on LinkedIn, and write what you learned. When you write what you learned, please tag the mentors and tell them thank you, because we are so grateful. We are so grateful. And I think that is a very important discussion that we should be having. Even though in Africa, we are still getting more accustomed to AI, but I think it's something that we should start talking about and understanding, so that we can also put it in our policies and work better with it. So thank you to everyone. Put your pictures, take your pictures. And finally, there is an option for private mentorship for the mentors that would accept it. This is just for those that might need to have private time with some of the mentors that we have here. So please check bit.ly/JIIPCC if you are interested, and we'll also reach out to the mentors to know those who are interested to work with us. So please take a picture. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an amazing weekend. Thank you, David. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Idoha. Take care of yourselves. Love you all. Thanks to all the mentees. Thank you, Rebecca. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.